The invitation was meant to be cruel. Everyone at the table knew it. The laughter that followed was sharp, mean-spirited, and designed to cut deep. But nobody at that elegant dinner party in Austin, Texas, could have predicted what would unfold when the man they mocked actually showed up. It was late September, and the evening air carried the warm remnants of summer mixed with the first hints of autumn. The Whitmore estate sat on 12 acres of manicured land just outside the city, its sprawling white columns and wraparound porch a testament to old money and older traditions. Inside, crystal chandeliers caught the fading sunlight and scattered it across walls adorned with original artwork worth more than most people earned in a decade. Margaret Whitmore, known to her friends as Maggie, stood at the head of the long mahogany table, her champagne flute raised in what was supposed to be a toast. She was 32 years old, impeccably dressed in a designer gown that cost more than some cars, and surrounded by the kind of people who measured worth in zeros. Her engagement party was in full swing. 30 of the wealthiest, most influential people in Austin had gathered to celebrate her upcoming marriage to Jonathan Hayes, a man whose family owned half the commercial real estate in the city. The guest list read like a who's who of Texas high society: oil executives, tech billionaires, politicians, and the kind of socialites whose Instagram followings rivaled small countries. But at that moment, Maggie was not thinking about her future husband or her diamond ring that could blind someone in direct sunlight. She was thinking about a man named Marcus Cole, and the look on his face earlier that week when she had handed him an invitation to this very party. The memory made her laugh again, a sound that others at the table joined without knowing why. 3 days earlier, Maggie had been leaving her favorite boutique on Congress Avenue when she nearly collided with a motorcycle parked illegally on the sidewalk. The bike was massive, a black and chrome machine that seemed to growl even while sitting still. Leaning against it was a man who looked like he had been carved from stone and wrapped in leather. Marcus Cole was 45 years old, though the years showed more in his eyes than on his face. His dark hair was streaked with gray at the temples, and a scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, a souvenir from a place he never talked about. He wore a leather vest over a simple black t-shirt, and his arms were covered with tattoos that told stories only he understood. He had been in Austin for 6 months, working at a custom motorcycle shop on the east side of town. Before that, he had spent 20 years in the military, including 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. He had seen things that would break most people, done things that still visited him in the dark hours of the night. But he had survived, and he had found a kind of peace in the simple act of building things with his hands. When Maggie stumbled, he caught her arm to steady her. Their eyes met for just a moment, and something in his gaze made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't explain. It was not threatening, not predatory. It was simply calm, certain, and utterly indifferent to everything she represented. She pulled away from him as if his touch burned. "Watch where you park that thing," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of contempt that came naturally to people who had never been told no. Marcus said nothing. He just looked at her, really looked, and then he smiled. It was a small smile, almost sad, as if he could see right through her expensive clothes and perfect makeup to something underneath that she herself had forgotten existed. That smile infuriated her. On impulse, she reached into her purse and pulled out one of the elegant cream-colored invitations she had been carrying. The engagement party was supposed to be exclusive, a gathering of equals. But in that moment, Maggie wanted nothing more than to put this man in his place. "Here," she said, thrusting the invitation at him. "Why don't you come to my party? I'm sure you'll fit right in with your leather and your tattoos. Everyone could use some entertainment." She expected him to crumple the invitation, to tell her where she could put it, to react with the anger she was trying to provoke. Instead, he took it from her hand, glanced at the details, and nodded once. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'll be there." Then he climbed onto his motorcycle and rode away, leaving Maggie standing on the sidewalk with the strangest feeling that she had just made a terrible mistake. By the time of the party, she had convinced herself that he would never actually show up. The story of the invitation had become a favorite among her friends, told and retold with embellishments that made her seem clever and him seem pathetic. A biker at the Whitmore estate. The very idea was absurd. So when the butler appeared at the dining room door with an expression of barely concealed alarm, Maggie's champagne went down the wrong way. "Ma'am," the butler said, his voice tight with disapproval, "there is a gentleman at the gate. He says he has an invitation." The table fell silent. Every head turned toward Maggie, and she felt her face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and something else she refused to name. "He actually came," someone whispered, and the whisper was followed by laughter. "Well," Jonathan said, his smile thin and cold, "we should let him in. It would be rude to turn away an invited guest." There was something in her fiancé's voice that should have warned Maggie, something calculating and cruel. But she was too caught up in the moment, too focused on the power she thought she held. "Yes," she said, forcing a smile. "Let him in. This should be entertaining." The wait felt longer than it was. Conversations resumed, but they were muted, expectant. Everyone was waiting to see the spectacle, to witness the moment when this intruder would be exposed as exactly what they all knew he was. Less than them, unworthy of their company, a joke that had walked right through their gates. When Marcus Cole walked into the dining room, the silence that fell was absolute. He was dressed in clean jeans and a simple white button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his tattooed forearms. His leather vest was gone, replaced by a sport coat that looked like it might have been borrowed. His hair was combed, his face freshly shaved, and he carried himself with the kind of quiet dignity that could not be bought or faked. In one hand, he held a bottle of wine. Not expensive, not fancy, but chosen with obvious care. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Thank you for the invitation. I brought this for you and your fiancé. Congratulations on your engagement." For a moment, no one knew what to say. This was not the scene they had been expecting. This was not the embarrassment they had hoped to witness. Jonathan was the first to recover. He rose from his chair and approached Marcus with his hand extended and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Welcome," he said, pumping Marcus's hand once. "Please come in. Any friend of Maggie's is welcome here." The emphasis on the word friend made several people snicker. "Actually," Marcus said, "I don't think we're friends. Your fiancé invited me as a joke, and we both know it." The room went very still. Marcus turned to look at Maggie, and again she felt that unsettling sensation of being truly seen. "I came anyway," he continued, "because I've learned something in my life. When someone shows you who they are, you should pay attention. But it works both ways. I thought maybe if I showed up, you might see something too." "And what exactly would that be?" Jonathan asked, his voice sharp with growing irritation. Marcus smiled that same small, sad smile. "That kindness costs nothing. That cruelty reveals more about the person giving it than the person receiving it. That sometimes the people we laugh at are the ones who could teach us the most, if we were willing to listen." He set the wine bottle on the nearest table. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone or cause a scene. I was invited, so I came, but I can see I'm not welcome, and that's okay. I've been unwelcome in far worse places than this." He turned to leave. "Wait." The word came from an unexpected source, an elderly woman at the far end of the table, her white hair perfectly coiffed and her eyes sharp behind elegant glasses. Eleanor Whitmore, Maggie's grandmother and the true matriarch of the family, rose slowly from her chair. "Young man," she said, her voice carrying the authority of 8 decades of life, "please stay. I would very much like to hear more about you." The request hung in the air like a challenge. Jonathan's face tightened with displeasure. Maggie's cheeks burned with shame she did not fully understand. But Eleanor Whitmore had spoken, and in this house, her word was law. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am, if you're sure." "I'm always sure," Eleanor said with a hint of a smile. "Please take the seat next to me. I believe we have an empty chair." As Marcus walked the length of that long table, every eye followed him. Some gazes held contempt, others curiosity, and a few held something that might have been respect. He moved with the kind of easy grace that comes from years of discipline, from surviving situations where any misstep could be fatal. When he sat down next to Eleanor, she patted his hand once, a brief gesture of welcome that spoke volumes. "Now then," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "tell me about yourself. And please, don't leave anything out. I find the truth is always far more interesting than the stories people like to tell." What followed over the next hour would change the trajectory of several lives. But before we continue with what Marcus revealed about his past, there's something I want to share with you. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. If you believe that true character is revealed not by wealth or status but by how we treat others, especially strangers, then you belong here with us. Subscribe now, because stories like this one remind us what really matters. Chapter 2. Eleanor Whitmore had lived through 11 presidents, 2 husbands, and more Texas summers than she cared to count. She had seen fortunes made and lost, watched empires rise and crumble, and buried more friends than she had remaining. At 87 years old, she had earned the right to speak her mind and the wisdom to know when words mattered. What she saw in Marcus Cole was something that most of the people at that table could not recognize because they had never possessed it themselves: authenticity. "Start from the beginning," she said, settling back in her chair with her wine glass in hand. "Where are you from originally?" "Small town in West Virginia, ma'am. Coal country. My father worked the mines until they closed. Then he worked whatever jobs he could find until his body gave out. My mother cleaned houses for families not so different from this one." A few uncomfortable glances were exchanged around the table, but Eleanor's expression remained interested and encouraging. "And what led you to the military?" "Honestly, I needed a way out. I was 18 years old with no money for college and no prospects. The recruiter promised me 3 meals a day, a place to sleep, and a chance to see the world. He didn't mention the parts about getting shot at, but I probably wouldn't have listened anyway." "What branch?" "Army. Infantry first. Then I went through selection for special forces. Spent most of my career in places I still can't talk about, doing things that needed to be done." Jonathan leaned forward, his skepticism evident. "So you're saying you were some kind of special operations soldier? That's convenient." Marcus turned to look at him, and something in his eyes made Jonathan lean back involuntarily. "I'm not saying anything I can't prove," Marcus replied quietly. "But the things I'm most proud of are the ones that will never be public record. The children we evacuated from a village before it was overrun. The local interpreter we protected for 3 years, who's now a citizen living in Ohio with his family. The young soldiers I trained who came home alive because they listened when it mattered." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I'm also not proud of everything I did. War makes you do things that stay with you. I've made peace with most of it, but peace isn't the same as forgetting." Eleanor nodded slowly. "And what brought you to Austin?" "After I got out, I drifted for a while. Couldn't settle, couldn't sleep, couldn't find anything that felt real. A buddy of mine from my unit opened a motorcycle shop here and offered me a job. Said working with my hands might help. He was right." "You build motorcycles?" "Restore them, mostly. Take something broken and make it whole again. There's something healing about that, I think. Reminds you that things can be fixed, even when they seem beyond repair." Down the table, Maggie found herself listening despite her determination to remain detached. There was something in the way Marcus spoke, a lack of self-pity or self-aggrandizement that made everything he said ring true. He wasn't performing for anyone or trying to impress. He was simply answering an old woman's questions with honesty. "Tell me about the tattoos," Eleanor said, gesturing toward his arms. "I've always found body art fascinating." Marcus smiled, a real smile this time, and rolled up his sleeves slightly. "This one," he said, pointing to an intricate design on his forearm, "is the names of every member of my unit who didn't come home. 7 names. I got it so I'd never forget them, even though I couldn't forget if I tried." He moved to another tattoo, a simple set of coordinates. "This is the location where we pulled a family of 4 out of a burning building during a firefight. Father, mother, 2 kids. I have no idea what happened to them, but I like to think they're somewhere safe." And another, a small cross with a date beneath it. "My mother, the day she passed. I wasn't there, I was overseas, and I didn't make it back in time. This way, she's always with me." Eleanor reached out and touched his arm gently. "You've carried a great deal, young man." "No more than a lot of people, ma'am. Just different weight." The conversation that followed ranged across topics that surprised everyone at the table. Marcus spoke about books he had read, places he had been, people he had met. He discussed philosophy with Eleanor, debated politics with a senator who had been prepared to dismiss him, and answered questions about motorcycle maintenance from a tech executive who had never ridden one but suddenly wanted to try. What became clear, slowly but undeniably, was that Marcus Cole was not the ignorant stereotype they had all assumed. He was educated, articulate, and possessed of a depth of experience that made most of their privileged lives seem almost shallow by comparison. He had walked through fire and emerged with his humanity intact, but not everyone at the table was impressed. Jonathan Hayes watched the scene unfold with growing resentment. He was a man who had always been told he was exceptional, special, destined for great things. His wealth was inherited, his success largely manufactured by family connections, and his confidence was the brittle kind that crumbles under real pressure. He did not like being upstaged, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. "This is all very touching," Jonathan said during a lull in conversation, his voice carrying the false lightness of someone about to say something ugly. "But I'm curious about something. If you're such a hero, what are you doing working in a motorcycle shop? Shouldn't someone with your impressive resume be doing something more significant?" The question was designed to wound, to remind everyone of Marcus's humble circumstances. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the cruelty beneath the casual tone. Marcus took a moment before responding, and when he spoke, his voice held no defensiveness. "I spent 20 years doing significant things," he said. "I helped protect this country and the people in it. I watched friends sacrifice everything, including their lives. When I got out, I realized that significance doesn't always look the way people expect it to." He picked up his wine glass and studied it for a moment. "The guy who owns the shop? He has a son with special needs. Can't afford the kind of care the kid deserves, but he's doing everything he can. Every motorcycle I help build, every restoration we complete, puts food on that family's table and keeps their insurance paid up. Last month, we raised enough from a custom build to cover the boy's therapy for a year." He set down the glass and met Jonathan's eyes directly. "That might not seem significant to you, but when I see that kid smile, when his father shakes my hand with tears in his eyes, when I know that my work actually means something to real people, that's more significant than anything else I could be doing." Eleanor began to clap. It was soft at first, just her weathered hands coming together in slow appreciation. But then others joined in, one by one, until the applause spread around the table like a wave. Not everyone participated. Jonathan sat with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. Maggie clapped automatically, but her mind was elsewhere, processing something she couldn't quite name. "Well said," Eleanor declared. "Now I believe it's time for dessert. Marcus, I insist you stay. I want to hear more about these motorcycles of yours. I've always been curious about what it feels like to ride one." "I'd be happy to tell you, ma'am. And if you're ever feeling adventurous, I could take you for a ride. Nice and slow, of course." Eleanor laughed, a sound of genuine delight that made her seem decades younger. "Young man, I may be old, but I'm not dead yet. I just might take you up on that." The party continued, but something fundamental had shifted. The casual cruelty that had characterized the evening's early hours was replaced by something more complicated. Marcus Cole had walked into a room designed to diminish him and had somehow managed to illuminate the darkness that many of those present had been carrying without acknowledgement. But the night was far from over, and as dessert was served and conversations continued, Jonathan Hayes quietly excused himself and made a phone call that would change everything. What he was planning would test Marcus's character in ways that even his military training hadn't prepared him for. Because the real challenge wasn't facing enemies who announced themselves. It was recognizing them when they wore friendly masks. In a dimly lit corner of the house, Jonathan spoke in hushed tones to someone on the other end of the line. "I don't care how you do it," he said. "I want him gone. Tonight." Chapter 3. The estate grounds at night were a study in contrasts. Manicured lawns gave way to carefully tended gardens, and beyond them, a small lake reflected the stars like scattered diamonds. It was the kind of setting that belonged in magazines, a manufactured paradise where nature itself seemed to bow to wealth. Marcus had stepped outside for air after dessert, needing a moment away from the intensity of the evening. The attention had been overwhelming, not because he wasn't used to pressure, but because this particular kind of scrutiny was unfamiliar. On the battlefield, he knew the rules. Here he felt like a man navigating by stars he couldn't quite see. He stood by the water's edge, watching the moonlight ripple across the surface, when he heard footsteps approaching. He didn't turn. His instincts told him they were light, hesitant, feminine. "I didn't expect you to actually come." Maggie's voice was different than before. Gone was the contempt, the performative cruelty. What remained was something quieter, almost fragile. "I almost didn't," Marcus admitted. "Spent most of the week telling myself it was a waste of time, that I had nothing to prove to people who'd already made up their minds about me." "Then why did you?" He turned to face her. In the moonlight, stripped of her social armor and the audience that demanded she perform, Maggie looked younger than her years, vulnerable in a way she probably hadn't allowed herself to be in a very long time. "Because I remembered something my mother used to say. She said that every person we meet is fighting a battle we know nothing about. She said we should try to be kind, even when people don't deserve it, because kindness has a way of finding its way back." Maggie wrapped her arms around herself, though the night wasn't cold. "I don't deserve your kindness. I was horrible to you. The invitation was meant to humiliate you, and instead you showed up and made me look human?" Marcus suggested gently. "That's not a bad thing to look like." "I was going to say foolish. Those aren't the same thing." She walked closer to the water, standing a few feet away from him but still maintaining distance. "Why aren't you angry? If someone had done to me what I did to you, I'd be furious." Marcus considered the question for a moment. "I spent a lot of years being angry," he said finally. "Angry at the world for being unfair, angry at people for being cruel, angry at myself for things I couldn't change. Eventually, I realized that anger was like carrying a burning coal. The only person it was hurting was me." "So what, you just let it go?" "Not exactly. I learned to redirect it, to use it as fuel for something productive instead of letting it destroy me from the inside. Anger isn't bad, it's information. It tells you something matters. The question is what you do with that information." Maggie turned to look at him. Really look at him, perhaps for the first time. "I don't understand you," she said. "You don't fit into any category I know." "Maybe that's the point. Maybe people aren't supposed to fit into categories." They stood in silence for a moment, two people from vastly different worlds finding unexpected common ground in the darkness. "Can I ask you something?" Maggie said finally. "Go ahead." "My grandmother clearly admires you. She doesn't admire anyone easily. She spent her whole life surrounded by people who wanted something from her, so she developed this radar for authenticity. She can spot a fake from across a crowded room." "What's your question?" "How do you do it? How do you stay real? Everyone I know is performing all the time, including me. We're all wearing masks, playing roles. But you walked in there and just were yourself. How?" Marcus turned to face the lake again, his reflection shimmering alongside the stars. "When I was in Afghanistan, my unit got ambushed. Bad situation, multiple casualties, chaos everywhere. I found myself trapped behind a wall with a young soldier from Kentucky, 19 years old, scared out of his mind. He looked at me and asked me the same thing you just did. He wanted to know how I stayed calm, how I seemed so sure of myself when everything was falling apart." He paused, the memory clearly still vivid. "I told him the truth. I wasn't calm at all. I was terrified. But I had learned that fear doesn't go away just because you want it to. The only thing you can control is whether you let it make decisions for you. I was scared, but I wasn't going to let that fear stop me from doing what needed to be done." "Did you both make it out?" "We did. He's a firefighter now. Sends me Christmas cards every year with pictures of his kids. Maggie felt something shift inside her, a crack in the walls she had spent years building. This man, this stranger she had tried to humiliate, was offering her something that all her wealth and status had never been able to provide, a moment of genuine connection. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "Jonathan, he's not happy about tonight. The way you handled yourself, the attention you got, especially from my grandmother. He sees it as a threat." "A threat to what?" "His image, his control, his certainty that he's the most important person in any room. You challenge that just by being who you are." Marcus nodded slowly. "I appreciate the warning." "It's not just a warning. I'm worried. Jonathan has a temper, and he has resources. When he doesn't get what he wants, he doesn't accept it gracefully. He finds ways to punish people." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of engines shattered the night's peace. Not one engine, but several, approaching fast and loud. From the direction of the main gate, headlights appeared. 3 vehicles at least, maybe more, tearing up the driveway toward the house. Marcus's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The calm philosopher by the lake vanished, replaced by something harder, more alert. His eyes scanned the darkness, calculating distances and angles, assessing threats that hadn't yet materialized. "Get inside," he said to Maggie, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. "What's happening?" "I don't know yet, but whatever it is, you don't want to be out here when it arrives. Go inside, find your grandmother, and stay away from the windows." "Marcus, go, now." Something in his tone made argument impossible. Maggie turned and hurried toward the house, glancing back once to see Marcus standing motionless, watching the approaching vehicles with the steady calm of a man who had faced worse. The vehicles screeched to a halt in front of the house. Doors opened and figures emerged. In the glow of the estate's exterior lights, Marcus could see them clearly. 6 men, roughly dressed, with the look of hired muscle. Leading them was a man Marcus didn't recognize, but whose purpose was unmistakable. "You Marcus Cole?" the leader called out, walking toward him with the swagger of someone used to intimidating others. "Depends who's asking." "Doesn't matter who's asking. What matters is you're leaving, right now, and you're not coming back." Marcus stood his ground. "Is that right?" "That's right. This is a private party, and you're not welcome. You can walk away on your own, or we can help you. Your choice. And if I choose to stay?" The leader smiled, revealing a gold tooth that caught the light. "Then things get complicated." Behind Marcus, the doors to the estate opened. He didn't turn, but he heard the gasps from the party guests who had gathered to watch the confrontation. He heard Eleanor's voice, demanding to know what was going on. He heard Jonathan's silence, speaking louder than any words. And he heard something else, the distant rumble of more engines, approaching from a different direction. This next part of the story is where I need to pause and ask you something. If this scene has touched your heart, if you're rooting for Marcus, if you believe that courage and integrity matter more than wealth and power, then leave a comment saying, "Some people wear armor on the outside. True warriors wear it on the inside." I want to know who in this audience understands what real strength looks like. Chapter 4. The sound grew louder, a deep rumbling that seemed to resonate in the chest before it reached the ears. Through the darkness beyond the estate gates, headlights appeared. Not the harsh, aggressive beams of the vehicles that had brought the hired men, but something different. These lights moved in formation, disciplined and purposeful. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. They rolled through the open gates with the kind of precision that comes from years of riding together, each bike finding its place in an expanding arc that stretched across the front of the estate. The riders wore leather vests over their clothes, and in the glow of the headlights patches were visible. Military insignia, unit designations, and a central emblem that showed clasped hands over a flag. The Veterans' Brotherhood. Men and women who had served their country and found community in each other when the country they served seemed to have forgotten them. Leading the formation was a man Marcus knew well, Big Roy, the owner of the motorcycle shop where Marcus worked. Roy was 60 years old, 6.5 feet tall, and built like someone who had spent his youth throwing hay bales and his adulthood throwing punches. His gray beard was immaculately groomed, and his eyes held the kind of hard-earned wisdom that came from surviving things that would have broken lesser men. The hired muscle suddenly looked significantly less confident. Big Roy killed his engine and dismounted slowly, giving the impression of a man who had all the time in the world and no fear of what he might find. The other riders followed suit, forming a loose semicircle that made their numbers impossible to ignore. "Evening," Roy said, his deep voice carrying easily across the suddenly quiet scene. "Seems like we got here just in time for the party." The leader of the hired men took a step back, recalculating. "This isn't your business, old man." "See? That's where you're wrong." Roy walked toward Marcus, coming to stand beside him. "Marcus here is one of ours. That makes his business our business." "One of yours?" "He's a mechanic. He's a brother. Served 3 tours overseas, received more commendations than you've had hot dinners, and saved more lives than you could count if you spent all night trying. But I don't expect you to understand that." Other riders had begun to dismount now, moving with casual purpose to positions that happened to cut off the hired men's routes of retreat. It wasn't aggressive, not exactly, but it was unmistakable. "We don't want trouble," Roy continued. "We just want to make sure our friend here gets treated with the respect he's earned. If you want to have a conversation about that, we're happy to listen. But if you're planning something else..." He let the sentence hang, incomplete but perfectly clear. The leader looked at his men, at the wall of veterans surrounding them, at the odds that had shifted dramatically against him. Then he looked toward the house where Jonathan Hayes was watching from a window with an expression of barely concealed panic. "This isn't over," the leader said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Son, for you it is." Roy's tone was almost gentle, the way a father might speak to a child who had made a bad choice. "Take your boys and go home. Tell whoever sent you that Marcus Cole has family, and family doesn't leave family to face trouble alone." For a moment, the scene hung in balance. Then, with a gesture to his men, the leader retreated. They piled back into their vehicles and drove away, the sound of their engines fading into the night until only the chirping of crickets and the settling ticks of cooling motorcycles remained. Roy turned to Marcus and clasped his shoulder. "You okay, brother?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "Yeah, thanks for showing up. Like I was going to miss this." Roy's weathered face creased into a grin. "Jake saw those jokers heading out this direction and called me, said it looked like trouble. We were at the VFW for the monthly meeting anyway, so we figured we'd take a ride." "All 30 of you?" 42, actually. Some of the guys are still finding parking." Despite everything, Marcus laughed. It was a sound that carried across the estate grounds and seemed to break the tension that had gripped the evening. From the doorway of the house, Eleanor Whitmore began to clap. Once again, others joined her, but this time the applause was different. It was genuine, heartfelt, and directed not just at Marcus, but at all the men and women who had ridden through the night to stand beside him. "Young man," Eleanor called out, making her way carefully down the steps with surprising speed for someone her age. "I believe you mentioned something about giving me a ride." Roy's eyebrows rose. "Miss Eleanor Whitmore?" "The same. And you are?" "Roy Jensen, ma'am. Marcus here works with me. Finest mechanic I've ever had." "I don't doubt it." Eleanor reached them and extended her hand, which Roy took with surprising gentleness. "Mr. Jensen, your arrival was impeccably timed. I've always appreciated men who know how to make an entrance." "Been making entrances for 60 years, ma'am. Comes with practice." "Indeed." Eleanor turned to survey the assembled veterans, her eyes bright with interest. "Would your colleagues care to join us? I believe the party was just getting interesting, and we seem to have more than enough refreshments." Roy looked at Marcus, who shrugged. "I think the lady is inviting us in," Marcus said. "I think she is." "Boys," Roy called out to the assembled riders, "it appears we've been invited to a party. Mind your manners, represent the brotherhood well, and somebody help Mrs. Whitmore up the stairs." What followed was one of the most unusual scenes the Whitmore estate had ever witnessed. 42 leather-clad veterans mingled with 30 of Austin's social elite, and somehow, improbably, conversation began to flow. Stories were exchanged, hands were shaken, and barriers that had seemed insurmountable began to dissolve. The society guests learned that many of the riders had advanced degrees, successful businesses, and families who loved them. The veterans learned that not everyone with money was cold or cruel, that some of them had their own battles and their own scars, just different from the ones visible on the skin. Eleanor moved through the crowd like a queen holding court, introducing people who would never otherwise have met and delighting in the connections that formed. She listened to stories of service with genuine interest, asked questions that showed she understood more than most people suspected, and made each person she spoke with feel seen and valued. At one point, she found herself in conversation with a female rider named Sarah, a former helicopter pilot who now ran a non-profit providing flight training to disadvantaged youth. "You remind me of myself," Eleanor told her. "I flew planes during the war, you know, ferrying aircraft from factories to air bases. They called us the Wasps." Sarah's eyes widened. "You were a WASP? Ma'am, that's incredible. Those women were pioneers." "We were just doing what needed to be done, same as you and your colleagues." Eleanor patted Sarah's arm. "The world has a way of making heroes out of ordinary people when circumstances demand it. The trick is recognizing that those heroes are everywhere, if we just take the time to look." Meanwhile, Marcus found himself in an unexpected conversation with Jonathan Hayes. Jonathan had emerged from the house eventually, his earlier bravado replaced by something more subdued. He approached Marcus where he stood talking with Big Roy, his hands in his pockets and his expression unreadable. "Could we speak privately?" Jonathan asked. Roy looked ready to refuse, but Marcus nodded. "It's okay. I'll be fine." They walked to a quiet corner of the garden, far enough from the festivities to speak without being overheard. "I suppose you're expecting an apology," Jonathan said. "I'm not expecting anything." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I sent those men. I'm sure you figured that out." "Yeah. I wanted you gone. I wanted you humiliated. I wanted to prove that people like you don't belong in places like this." "And now?" Jonathan was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, stripped of its usual arrogance. "My grandfather built this family's fortune. He started with nothing, just a piece of dirt, and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. By the time he died, he owned half the commercial real estate in Austin. Everyone said he was a great man." "What do you say?" "I say I never knew him. He died before I was born. All I know is the legend, the expectations, the weight of a name I didn't earn." Jonathan met Marcus's eyes. "I've spent my whole life trying to live up to something I can't even remember, and somewhere along the way I became someone I don't recognize. That's a hard thing to admit. It doesn't change what I did tonight." "No, but it might change what you do tomorrow." Jonathan blinked, clearly surprised. "You're not going to press charges? Report me?" "For what? Being insecure and making bad choices? Half the world would be in jail." Marcus's voice was level, without malice. "I don't know who your grandfather was, but I know that the measure of a man isn't what he inherits. It's what he does with it. You have resources, opportunities, a platform. You could use them to make things better or worse. That choice is yours. And if I keep making it worse, then eventually, the world will hold you accountable. Not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. The truth has a way of surfacing." They stood in silence as the sounds of the party drifted toward them. Laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses. A world that had seemed so divided a few hours ago now, somehow working together. "I don't know how to be different," Jonathan admitted quietly. "I've been this way my whole life." "Then start small, one choice at a time, one day at a time. Nobody changes everything overnight, but everybody can change something." Jonathan nodded slowly, though whether he truly understood remained to be seen. Some seeds take years to grow, and some soil is harder than others. What mattered was that the seed had been planted. Chapter 5. The party continued well past midnight, evolving into something none of the original guests could have predicted. Small groups formed and reformed, conversations deepened, and walls that had stood for generations began to show cracks. Maggie found herself sitting with three of the veteran riders, listening to their stories with an attention she hadn't given to anything in years. One of them, a soft-spoken man named David, had been a medic in Vietnam. He was 73 years old, and he still volunteered at the local VA hospital every week. "Why do you do it?" Maggie asked. "After everything you've been through, why keep putting yourself in difficult situations?" David considered the question. "Because I can. Because the young men and women coming back now are facing things I understand. And because helping others is the only way I've found to make sense of what I saw." Make sense of it how? If all that pain led to nothing, it would be unbearable. But if I can use what I learned to help even one person, then it meant something. The suffering wasn't wasted. Maggie felt tears forming in her eyes, which surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she had cried. "I don't think I've ever done anything meaningful," she said quietly. "I've spent my whole life acquiring things, attending events, maintaining an image. But I can't think of a single time I actually helped someone who needed it." "Then today's a good day to start." "Just like that?" "Just like that." David smiled gently. "You know what I've learned in 73 years? Most people who do bad things aren't evil. They're just lost. They've forgotten who they are underneath all the noise. And most people who do good things aren't saints. They're just folks who decided to pay attention and show up. It can't be that simple. Simple doesn't mean easy. It's the hardest thing in the world to look at yourself honestly and decide to do better. But it starts with a single step. And tonight, you're sitting here talking to an old veteran when you could be inside with people who wouldn't challenge anything about your life. That's a step. Across the room, Eleanor was deep in conversation with Big Roy, and from the animated gestures they were making, it was clear they had found common ground. "Motorcycles," Eleanor was explaining, "are freedom. I understood that the moment I first sat on one. I was 17 years old and my father nearly had a heart attack, but I didn't care. For those few minutes, I wasn't a Whitmore with expectations and obligations. I was just a girl, and the road and the wind." "You sound like one of us," Roy said with genuine warmth. "I wish I could have been. Life took me in different directions. But I've always envied people who chose freedom over safety, adventure over comfort. It's never too late, you know. I've got a sidecar, nice and stable. We could take a ride around the lake right now if you wanted." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with something youthful. "Mr. Jensen, are you asking me on a date?" "I'm asking you on a ride. What happens after that is up to the universe." She laughed, that same delighted sound from earlier, and reached for his arm. "Then let's not keep the universe waiting." What followed became legend among the Veterans Brotherhood and the Whitmore family alike. Big Roy helped Eleanor down the stairs and over to his motorcycle, where he settled her into the sidecar with all the care of a man handling precious cargo. The party guests gathered on the porch to watch as the engine roared to life. Eleanor raised one hand in a wave, her white hair streaming in the wind as they pulled away, and for just a moment, she was 17 again. They rode slowly around the lake, the moonlight illuminating their path, and when they returned 15 minutes later, Eleanor was beaming. "That," she announced as Roy helped her out of the sidecar, "is exactly what I've been missing. Mr. Jensen, you have standing invitation to this estate, and bring your friends. They're far more interesting than most of the people I know." The night wound down gradually, people departing in groups with handshakes and promises to stay in touch that might actually be kept. The veteran riders left in the same formation they had arrived in, a procession of lights disappearing into the darkness with dignity intact. Marcus was one of the last to leave. He had helped with some of the cleanup over the butler's half-hearted protests and had spent time talking with Eleanor about her experiences as a WASP pilot. It was nearly 2 a.m. when he finally headed for his motorcycle. Maggie caught him at the door. "Wait," she said. "Please." He turned to face her, and in the soft light of the entrance hall, she seemed like a different person than the one who had thrust that invitation at him on the sidewalk. I wanted to thank you, she said. And to apologize. Not just for the invitation, but for everything. For being the kind of person who thought that invitation was funny. You've already apologized. I know. But I feel like I should keep doing it until it actually means something. Marcus studied her for a moment. Let me ask you something. A week from now, a month from now, when the memory of tonight has faded and you're back in your normal life, what will you do differently? The question clearly caught her off guard. I don't know. That's an honest answer. Better than a promise you can't keep. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. This is the address of the shop where I work. We do a charity event once a month, building bikes for veterans who need transportation. We could always use volunteers, not money, actual hands-on help. Maggie took the card, looking at it as if it held answers to questions she hadn't known to ask. I've never built anything in my life. Then you'll learn, same as the rest of us. He started toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I don't think you're a bad person, Maggie. I think you're a person who got lost somewhere along the way. We've all been there. The question is whether you want to find your way back. She didn't respond, but she didn't have to. Some conversations plant seeds that take time to grow. Marcus walked out into the night, where his motorcycle waited patiently. The air was cooler now, carrying the first real promise of autumn. He straddled the bike, started the engine, and sat for a moment, listening to the steady rumble. Behind him, the Whitmore estate glowed softly in the darkness, a world he would probably never return to. But something had shifted there tonight, cracks forming in foundations that had seemed permanent. What grew from those cracks remained to be seen. He rode into the night, the road stretching before him like a promise, and somewhere above, the stars looked on with ancient indifference. But the story wasn't over yet. Chapter 6. 3 months later, the first frost of winter had settled over Austin, turning the city into a sparkling wonderland that would melt by noon. At the Veterans Brotherhood motorcycle shop, the morning began like any other. The smell of coffee mixing with motor oil, the sound of tools against metal, and the quiet camaraderie of men and women who understood each other without needing to explain. Marcus was elbow-deep in a vintage Harley when the front door opened and a familiar figure walked in. He almost didn't recognize her at first. Dressed as she was in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Maggie? She held up the card he had given her, now worn at the edges from being handled countless times. You said you could use volunteers. I'm here to volunteer. Big Roy emerged from the back office, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at Maggie, then at Marcus, and a slow smile spread across his weathered face. Well now, he said. Looks like we've got ourselves a new recruit. You know anything about motorcycles? Nothing at all. Perfect. That's exactly where Marcus started. He turned out okay. Roy extended a hand. Welcome to the shop. Hope you brought work clothes. I'm wearing them. Then let's get you started. What followed over the next several months would have seemed impossible to anyone who knew Maggie Whitmore before that engagement party. She showed up 3 times a week, sometimes more, and threw herself into learning with the kind of dedication that surprised everyone, including herself. She learned to change oil and replace spark plugs. She learned to identify the sounds of a healthy engine versus one in trouble. She burned herself, cut herself, and developed calluses on hands that had never known manual labor. And she kept coming back. The engagement to Jonathan had ended quietly, just a few weeks after the party. It had been Maggie's decision, and to his credit, Jonathan hadn't fought it. Whatever had passed between him and Marcus that night seemed to have planted seeds of its own. Last anyone heard, he had stepped back from his family's business and was traveling, trying to find something real in a life that had always been performed. Maggie had taken over the charitable foundation that bore her family's name, but she ran it differently now. Instead of galas and photo opportunities, she focused on programs that made tangible differences. Housing for veterans, job training for disadvantaged youth, scholarships for children of active military. The Whitmore Foundation became known for results rather than appearances, But her real transformation happened at the shop. It was there, surrounded by people who measured worth in character rather than net worth, that Maggie finally understood what David had meant that night. Simple doesn't mean easy. Showing up, being present, doing the work. Those were the hardest things in the world, and also the most rewarding. Eleanor, true to her word, had become a regular presence as well. She didn't work on motorcycles, but she held court in a comfortable chair that Roy had installed just for her, dispensing wisdom and stories to anyone who would listen. The veterans adored her, and she adored them back. On a Saturday morning in early February, the shop hosted its monthly charity build. A veteran named Thomas, who had lost both legs in an IED explosion, was receiving a custom-built motorcycle with hand controls that would allow him to ride again. The presentation took place in the parking lot, where Thomas sat in his wheelchair with tears streaming down his face as Roy handed him the keys. "This bike was built by a lot of hands," Roy said, his deep voice carrying over the assembled crowd. "Some of those hands belong to veterans who understand what you've been through, and some belong to friends who just wanted to help. But they all worked together, and they all built this for you." Thomas took the keys with trembling fingers. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, just ride." With help from several volunteers, Thomas was settled onto the motorcycle. The hand controls had been designed specifically for him, and after a few moments of orientation, he twisted the throttle. The engine roared to life, and Thomas pulled away, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. He circled the parking lot once, twice, 3 times, and with each pass, his smile grew wider. The crowd cheered and several people wiped their eyes. Maggie stood beside Marcus, watching the scene unfold. "This is why you do it," she said quietly. "This moment, right here. This and 1,000 others like it, some bigger, some smaller, but every single one matters. I understand that now. I don't know how I didn't see it before." Marcus turned to look at her. In the months since that party, she had changed in ways that went beyond her wardrobe. There was a peace in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a groundedness that came from knowing who you were and what you valued. You see it now. That's what matters. Thomas completed his final lap and stopped in front of the crowd, his face wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking. "Thank you all. I thought my life was over when I lost my legs. I thought I'd never feel free again. But you gave me my freedom back. I don't know how to repay that." Eleanor stood from her chair and walked to him, taking his hand in hers. "You repay it by living," she said firmly. "By finding joy, by helping others when you can. That's how the gift keeps moving." The celebration continued, people mingling and sharing stories, food being passed around, laughter filling the air. It was a scene of genuine community, of humans connecting across every possible divide. Later that afternoon, as the crowd began to thin, Maggie found Eleanor sitting in her customary chair, looking contemplative. "Grandmother, are you all right?" Eleanor smiled. "I'm better than all right, my dear. I'm grateful. Do you know, I've lived 87 years and I've never felt more alive than I have in these past few months." "What do you mean?" "I mean that all my life, I was surrounded by people who wanted something from me. My money, my influence, my approval. But here, with these people, no one wants anything except my company. It's remarkably freeing." Maggie sat down beside her. "I know what you mean. I used to think freedom was having enough money to do whatever you wanted, but that's not it at all. No, it isn't. Freedom is being exactly who you are without pretense or performance. It's the freedom these veterans fought for, even if most people don't understand what it really means." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the activity around them. Then Eleanor spoke again. "I'm proud of you, Maggie. I know I've never said that before, but I should have. The woman you're becoming, she's someone your grandfather would have admired, and that's the highest compliment I can give." Maggie felt tears prick her eyes. In 87 years, Eleanor Whitmore had never been one for sentiment. This moment felt precious, fragile. important. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means everything." "Now then." Eleanor's brisk tone returned, though her eyes remained soft. "Help me up. I believe Big Roy mentioned something about taking me for another ride, and I don't intend to miss it." Maggie helped her grandmother stand, and together they walked toward where Roy was waiting beside his motorcycle, the sidecar already prepared. From across the parking lot, Marcus watched them go. He thought about that day on the sidewalk, the invitation thrust at him with contempt, the laughter of people who had never been tested. He thought about the party, the confrontation, the unexpected arrival of his brothers and sisters in arms, and he thought about what had grown from that single seed of cruelty, friendship, transformation, community. A woman who had lost her way finding her path back, an elderly matriarch discovering freedom in her final years. A family of veterans gaining new members who had never served but understood service. It wasn't the outcome anyone had expected. But then, life rarely followed the script we wrote for it. David, the Vietnam medic, came to stand beside Marcus. "Deep thoughts?" he asked. "Just thinking about how things work out sometimes. That invitation was supposed to be a joke, a way to humiliate me. Instead, it opened a door. Funny how that works, isn't it?" "Funny isn't the word I'd use." "No, I suppose not." David was quiet for a moment. "You know what I've learned in 73 years? Every single thing that happens to us, good or bad, is an opportunity. It's not about what happens. It's about what we do with it." You told Maggie something similar that night. I tell everyone that. Doesn't mean they listen, but she did. That's rare. The sound of Roy's motorcycle starting up drew their attention. Eleanor was settled in the sidecar, a scarf tied over her hair and a smile on her face that took decades off her age. As they pulled away, she raised her hand in a wave. Marcus waved back, and something in his chest loosened. A tension he hadn't known he was carrying finally releasing. He had come to Austin lost, drifting, searching for something he couldn't name. He had found it in the most unexpected place, a world of wealth and privilege that had initially seemed like enemy territory. But enemies could become allies, strangers could become family, and even the cruelest joke could be transformed into something beautiful. That was the lesson of this whole strange journey. Not that people were good or bad, kind or cruel, worthy or worthless, but that everyone was capable of change. And sometimes the catalyst for that change came from the most unlikely sources. A simple biker invited as a joke, an arrival that shocked an entire party, and a ripple effect that touched dozens of lives, transforming them in ways large and small, permanent and profound. The story you have just witnessed is not about motorcycles or money, veterans or socialites. It is about the simple truth that every human being matters. That kindness costs nothing but can change everything. That the walls we build between ourselves and others are often just fear wearing a different costume. If you watched this far, it is because something in this story spoke to you. Maybe it was Marcus's quiet dignity, or Eleanor's late life awakening, or Maggie's journey from cruelty to compassion. Whatever it was, hold on to it. Let it remind you that transformation is always possible, that it is never too late to become who you were meant to be. And if you believe that stories like this matter, if you want to see more narratives of redemption and humanity, then please subscribe to this channel. Every subscription helps us continue telling stories that remind us of what is possible when people choose kindness over contempt, courage over comfort, connection over isolation. If you watched this far, it is because you liked this case. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far," so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories on this channel. Also, if this story moved you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe a friend who is struggling, a family member who feels lost, or even a stranger who might benefit from the reminder that they are not alone. Because that is the real message of this story. None of us are alone. We are all connected, all part of the same human family, all capable of lifting each other up when we choose to pay attention. Marcus Cole walked into a party where he was not wanted, and he walked out with a new family, Maggie Whitmore started that night as someone lost in privilege, and she became someone grounded in purpose. Eleanor discovered at 87 that adventure was still possible. Thomas the veteran found his freedom again, and countless others, on both sides of that seemingly unbridgeable divide, learned that the walls between people are thinner than they appear. We take care of our own. And when we expand our definition of our own to include everyone we meet, something remarkable happens. The world becomes smaller, warmer, more connected. The darkness that seems so overwhelming starts to recede, and the light, however small, begins to spread. That is the power of a single act of unexpected kindness.